Good morning to all. Welcome to this ESMA webinar on the market report on crowdfunding in the EU 2025. So please be informed that this webinar will be recorded. You are all muted by default with also your cameras off. But after the presentation, you will be able to raise any question you may have in the Q&A box. So thanks again for joining. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Cicely, and also warm welcome from my side to all of you here on the call. My name is Stefan Kern, and I head the Economics, Financial Stability and Risk Department at ESMA, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you today to our crowdfunding webinar that we're holding today on the occasion of the publication of our second annual market report on crowdfunding in the EU that we just published shortly ago. It's a great pleasure to talk about this topic because crowdfunding is a small but exclusive market that is close to our hearts. It's a form of alternative finance. It typically involves small investments from many people through digital platforms. And it also involves, on the investment side, businesses, mainly startups and small, medium-sized enterprises. So actually groups of entrepreneurs that are particularly in need of financing on the one hand, and where in the European Union we have a close interest on developing the financing options in that market. It directly links investors to those seeking fundings, and it involves loans and transferable debt and equity securities. So it's a vibrant market at a small scale based on data that we receive from, on the one hand, national authorities in the European Union, but also from our own sources. We actually, under the European Crowdfunding Service Providers for Business Regulation, which is the framing regulatory body that governs this, we collect the data, and on that basis, we this year in this second report are in the great position to actually have a full data coverage across the national authorities. And full data coverage means that we are looking at 181 crowdfunding service providers across 21 member states. Like I said, of course, the market is an exclusive one. It's 4 billion in total in 2024 of crowdfunding raised in that market, which we need to be aware is, of course, compared to the whole lending landscape, but also publicly traded instruments, is very small, but it serves a specific purpose. And breaking down the data by funding model, by investor type and economic sectors, it actually becomes clear that this market plays a role. We have different funding models, and when we have the presentation in a minute, we will get more details on this one. So it's a diverse landscape of models themselves. We have a variety of investors where retail investors actually play a big role, and the investments themselves by sector, for example, are very diverse too, where real estate actually plays a big role. We need to be aware that this is about small investment sizes, so the average amounts raised per project are around 15,000 euros in the loan market, and 53 and 46,000 euros in the debt and equity-based market. So this is also, from that perspective, a very special segment that serves a specific purpose. And finally, of course, there is geographic differences across the European Union. Our top 5 countries that we can report on include France, Netherlands, Spain, Italy, and Lithuania. So this annual report casts a very interesting and detailed light on that crowdfunding market, and it is mandated actually by the regulation itself. Ultimately, a stronger crowdfunding sector can enhance the potential of EU capital markets, and this, of course, is a key priority from a growth and investment perspective. We will be proceeding in this way in order to actually, through looking at that crowdfunding market and publishing this report, to better understand the market itself, to see how it develops, and also to identify where it may in future be strengthened further. In terms of the event today, it's a great pleasure, like I said, to welcome you. We will first have an opportunity to look in depth at the report itself. And we will kick off with a presentation by Alex Harris and Valentina Maydal, the senior officers in our department who worked on the analysis. After that presentation, our colleague Laurent Tristan, who is a senior policy officer in the Investor Protection and Intermediaries Unit and chair of the ESMA crowdfunding task force, will discuss the relevance of the analysis from a policy perspective. And we will conclude the session with Q&As, and of course you are warmly invited to ask your questions, and my colleagues will all be happy to answer these questions that you enter into the chat box of the event. With that, I thank you again for joining. I wish all of us very interesting discussions, and then thanks again for the interest, and of course to the speakers, Alex, Valentina, and Laurent for making this possible today. Thank you so much, and over to Alex. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stefan. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. So I will go into the presentation now, which summarizes the key findings from the reports. And then towards the end of the presentation, we will also have a particular focus on the use of AI by crowdfunding service providers based on some recent survey data from a survey that ESMA conducted, and my colleague Valentina will present that part. So I will kick off with a little bit of background. I think for many of those attending, this will not be news, but it's worth just being clear on the regulatory framework and mandates that we're operating under. So the European Crowdfunding Service Providers regulation covers investment and lending-based services which relate to business financing. And the regulation provides then a consistent framework across the Union and enables authorized platforms who are authorized under regulation to offer their services across the EU. We have some specific mandates as ESMA. ESMA maintains a register of providers, which is on the ESMA website under Article 14. That's been also a way we've been able to sense checks on the reporting data that we receive. And we've also completed several policy mandates, including technical standards and implementing and delegated acts, which were published in 2022. And then finally, we have under Article 16 a requirement to publish aggregated annual statistics on the market. And that's the basis for this ESMA market report, which, as mentioned, is now the second edition. So it's the 2025 report was published in December, and it covers the calendar year 2024. As Stefan mentioned at the beginning, the sort of headline figure is that we have 181 crowdfunding service providers authorized under the regulation that did at least some business, raised at least some funding in 2024. And they covered 21 different countries across the EU. So our our coverage now, in fact, is for the whole of the EEA, though, as it in practice, all the 21 countries were EU member states. We see that, as we saw also in the initial market report, there's a focus on loan-based crowdfunding. We see that there tends to be less capital raised through loan-based crowdfunding projects, and we also have noticed, and this was also a feature that's consistent with the previous report, that where there are smaller providers, so they raise less than 100,000 euros. This is just our own threshold that we included for analytical purposes. It's not a regulatory definition, but among those raising less than 100,000 euros, a larger majority, so a very large majority, was loan-based. Among other providers and population generally, it was closer to half. We also see then from the perspective of investors that this is primarily a retail investor it caters to retail investors. So on the one hand, we have small and medium enterprises predominantly raising kind of money for initial projects or for niche projects. And we also have retail investors being the large majority of investors by type. There are also, however, some professional investors and sophisticated investors. Professional investors are those as defined under MiFID, and sophisticated investors are somewhat analogous to professional investors, but defined under the crowdfunding regulation. Looking then on the right-hand chart here, we also have data and a breakdown on the economic activities which are being supported by this funding. So we see that the purple dots on the right-hand chart are the numbers of investors, and there are relatively many investors. So the leading sector there is real estate. However, the total amount raised is smaller for that sector and is largest for professional activities. We have, unfortunately, no means to drill down further into these categories. So these are the NACE level 1 economic sector categories under the European taxonomy. We're unable to get further into that because of the nature of the data and the way the reporting is specified. But yes, we saw, and this is very much in line with what we would expect, and again, broadly consistent with the previous results, that retail investors tend to invest relatively small amounts. So it's possible also that they are investing elsewhere too, in other traditional financial instruments, but that this is an additional way for them to diversify their portfolio, or they may indeed just be kind of new to investing and putting money into crowdfunding for the first time. It's, again, difficult for us to get a sense of that from, it was not possible from the data, but this is something where if you have insights yourself from your own experience or market intelligence, we'd be very interested to hear, and perhaps as well as in the Q&A asking questions, if you have observations or information on developments in the market, we'd be very keen to hear that. I mentioned that there's been good continuity with last year's results, or high degree of continuity, I should say, with some differences. But for instance, the distribution of investor types at the top right chart here has been almost identical. We're a little cautious, though we're keen to develop annual time series in future and continue to improve the data coverage and quality as each edition comes along. We have to be a little cautious. So 2023, which was the previous year's report, was the first year when the reporting was in place, as well as taking time to set up and for platforms to kind of go live, having been authorized. There was also more limited coverage, but thanks to efforts from NCAs, but also from our own ESMA data experts, we've now got complete coverage as mentioned previously. In terms of the providers, which is the bottom chart here, so this is not a year-on-year comparison, but it's just an overall kind of snapshot of the geographic breakdown from the perspective of providers. We see that France had 50 registered providers, according to the reported data in 2024, which also was nearly twice that of the next largest country, Italy. And we also generally see quite a high degree of concentration of the market on this metric, but also on the other metrics, which I'll come on to on the next slide. We see quite a high degree of concentration among a few kind of key large markets. I think what one way to interpret that also is that there is potentially then there's scope for other markets to grow now that there is a uniform and coherent framework across the union. So in some of the larger markets, there were previously national level crowdfunding regulatory frameworks in place, and it seems clear that those frameworks have then enabled the sector to grow. Elsewhere, it may take time for it to grow, but we can retain some optimism there, I think is one way to interpret these figures. We also have a breakdown of funding raised. So here we see France, followed by the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, and then Lithuania in terms of the amount invested via providers based in that country. And we also see numbers of investors in local providers being relatively high for these countries, but also in some other jurisdictions as well. The bottom chart here is something that I think is quite interesting as a new way we've broken down the data for this edition of the reports. We can see at a country level what was the breakdown of the funding type mix. So this is across comparing loan-based crowdfunding, equity-based, debt-based, and other crowdfunding instruments admitted for crowdfunding purposes. We have generally loan-based crowdfunding being very predominant in many countries, except for the largest market, France, where in fact we saw debt-based, so securitized loans effectively being more prominent. And the final set of results which I'll present, which are our kind of ongoing core set of findings, relates to cross-border investing. So we see that there's a large degree of variation by country. So the share of investments that are cross-border is much higher in some jurisdictions than others. It's worth noting that for some of these jurisdictions, there is just one provider or a small number of providers. So if they tend to offer projects in other markets, then we can have very high shares, for instance, 100%. But more generally, we see that, including in some of the kind of mid-size or larger markets, there can also be very high shares of cross-border investing. So, for instance, here we see Estonia, which has a relatively large market for the size of the country. And then finally, we can see the investors where they're resident. And we see, in keeping with the fact that the French market from a provider and capital raise perspective is largest, we also see most investors being based in France and investing the most money. But as mentioned, we also see in some smaller jurisdictions relatively large numbers of investors too, which again, on a more optimistic interpretation, shows that there is scope for this kind of alternative means of financing to grow, especially if it's supported by a consistent framework. So with that, I will now hand over to my colleague Valentina, give some insights. This is more of a kind of one-off feature that we've included to try to investigate broadly developments in the sector. Valentina.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Indeed, this year we decided to complement our report by a section on the use of AI by some crowdfunding firms, on firms for which we had data. It's of course in our ESMA mandate to identify trends, and the result of course attention and with regards to AI and identify risks. And also we had a survey which ESMA conducted over summer 2025 for the whole sector, for all financial securities sector, including crowdfunding firms. And the result in this survey is a self-reported use of AI by firms in the sector. We conducted with objective to better understand and to gauge the level of AI adoption by these firms, to understand better what are the use cases and what are the risks, benefits, and how actually supervisors should build the supervisory approaches with regards to the use of AI. So we conducted this survey and we collected data for a bigger sample, of course, and here maybe it's already time to invite you to look at our article that we will publish in February on the use of AI by the whole sector. However, in this report, we provide some information already on the use of AI by 20 crowdfunding providers, who reported their data in the framework of this survey. These 20 providers come from 6 countries that I mentioned on the slide and the report. And they are mostly micro firms or small enterprises. Only one is medium-sized company. By micro firms, we understand companies with less than 10 people in them. By small enterprises between 10 and 50, and one medium it's between 50 and 250. So we do understand, of course, the limitations of these data. We do understand that we talk only about 20 providers. They are small. However, the trends that we observe are very aligned with the trends in the whole financial sector. And some of these trends are already, as I said, described in the report. So 10 crowdfunding providers reported that they have AI use cases in development, and 6 already have AI use cases in production. With regards to investments, crowdfunding platforms, again, aligned with the whole sample of financial firms, securities firms, they expect to increase their investments in AI. And this increase is driven by the expectations of cost reductions and somehow also generating revenues. When it comes to what is the key use cases for AI applications, we observe that they, and you have a nice chart here, so it's a summarization information, translation, code generation, so a lot of back office operational support tasks. But interestingly, we see also that crowdfunding firms use it for communication with clients and query handling, and it might be chatbots. However, for all the use cases, we see that the level of autonomy is low, meaning that decisions when AI is used are still taken by humans. We also observed that the reliance on third-party providers for cloud services and for model development is very high. And this is, again, very much aligned with the general trend that we observed across securities markets. We also have some data about explainability. So they evaluate the level of explainability as medium. And materiality is also evaluated as medium. So the firms that use AI, crowdfunding service providers that use AI, we can conclude they use it with caution. And again, this level of human involvement and controlling risks is quite high. Again, it was only for 20 crowdfunding service providers. To compare this with general trends, we invite you to read the article on describing and analyzing this AI survey, which will be published in February.
So thank you very much, Valentina. And one point to add is that we previously had requests for the aggregate figures in our report to be made available, so people can, for instance, replicate the charts and analysis that we have in our report. So I am just posting a link in the Q&A section, so you can also then access an interactive dashboard that we've created, and the underlying figures for the charts are easily available for our purpose. So the link is there. We will also include it in the slides before uploading those and sharing them on the ESMA website. So having concluded then the presentation from the analytical and statistical perspective, we now hand over to Laurent Tristan, who is, as mentioned, chair of the ESMA crowdfunding task force, and can give a policy perspective on this report. Laurent.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everyone. So, as mentioned, I'm chairing the ESMA Crowdfunding Task Force, which is a group, for those of you who don't know it, within ESMA, we're representative of most competent authorities. I think we have 21 or 22 member states represented. We meet to discuss and agree on the best and most harmonized way to apply the European crowdfunding regulation. Obviously, that's a lot of work. The crowdfunding task force is mostly a policy group. So as Alex was mentioning, we are not directly involved in the data gathering and economical analysis of data. We mostly we're more on the receiving end of the report, and we're trying to find in this report information that could be important for us. What we do mostly is we make sure that the application of the regulation is harmonized. We call this supervisory convergence, but also ensure that there is a smooth coordination between competent authorities and matter relating to crowdfunding. As you very well know, one of the key features introduced by the regulation is the ability to make business on a cross-border and provide services, to speak more legally speak, across the border. So that's the coordination between competent authorities are very important in this respect, and that's part of what we do in this task force. So we direct our work and set our priorities based on the issues raised by competent authorities, market participant, and also to an extent, and I think in a growing manner over the years, through the data that are collected in this report. Since the entry into application of the crowdfunding regulation and the various delegated regulation, we have first addressed the most obvious difficulty in the regulation, so the scope, the use of SPVs, which was a new feature in many member states, entry knowledge test, language of the KIS, which were, let's say, the very obvious point on which we needed to work. That was back in 2021, 2022. We work on this because these were obvious to all parties involved, and both market participants and NCAs needed clarification to deliver, to introduce authorization requests and to deliver authorization to the CSP, which were the crowdfunding service provider, which were either created ab initio or which were transferring pre-existing national authorization into the European authorization. Later on, as NCA and market participant went on and started to live with this new regime, we focus on other aspects which emerge, and that's pretty much the stage where we are at the moment. So basically, trying to clarify aspects which emerge after a couple of years of experience of the regulation. In this context, this annual report is helpful for us to grasp what the structure of the crowdfunding market is, to better understand which markets matter the most, what categories of investors are represented, and the type of funding models that's tremendously important for us, which are predominant in the Union and in each of the member states. So from this, there will be a lot to say, but from this 2025 report, I'd like to pick three aspects which are key for us. The first one is that the crowdfunding in the Union is very predominantly funded by retail investors. We obviously knew that, but it is very interesting to see that this is a trend which is a very strong one. Retail investors are a category of investors that is not homogeneous. And we are conscious of this, even though the regulation doesn't necessarily make subdivision into the retail category, but some of them are experienced in the field of investing and understand what's at stake with their investment. But I dare to say a large number of them are new and to investment, and needs to be not only informed but also protected. So this is what the ECSPR, the crowdfunding regulation, is trying to do, and this is how ESMA is approaching its work in its supervisory convergence task. So informing and protecting investors, taking into account that things need to be proportional. It's crucial, and I know a lot of you are, let's say, keen for this to be taken care of, in the sense that in the field of crowdfunding, the average investment can be quite small. So we need to protect investors, but we need to have in mind the need to be proportional in whatever requirements and the way we decide to apply the requirements applicable. The second aspect I'd like to pick is that while crowdfunding is slowly emerging across the union, and that's pretty much thanks to the regulation, some member states have a more developed industry. So I think it was mentioned several times already, there's a top 5. So France, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, and Lithuania. So obviously that's a very important indication for us to figure out where the bulk of the market is and where to look when looking for issues that needs to be harmonized and items that needs to be clarified. But not that the figure must be measured taking in consideration the overall population of the respective member state. For instance, the performance, I would say, of a country like Lithuania for a country of less than 3 million inhabitants indicate that how important crowdfunding had become, and the fact that it has it became a mean of a significant mean of financing of SMEs, at least in some member state. I can also see that the numbers of investors in Portugal, Czech Republic is very high when compared to the overall population size compared to other member states. That's also something to take in consideration for us. From a policy perspective, while we continue to monitor the whole 27 member states, very obviously, we will try and focus more closely on the practice into these 5 top markets, but also on markets where there is, let's say, a significant, let's say, market compared to the overall population of the member state. Third point I'd like to take on is the fact that crowdfunding remains a domestic-centric financing system. Of course, the CSPR or the crowdfunding regulation has helped some platforms to acquire European relevance. Some of them were already operating on a cross-border basis, and it was at the time very difficult because you needed to accumulate several authorizations in several member states. It was sort of a nightmare. So for those big players, the regulation had made things much easier. Those European sized firms, it becomes much easier, and the regulation has also helped or enabled some players to develop themselves and to become to have relevance at the European level. But and this is clearly something that was made possible by the addition of a passporting possibility. Some of you might say that it wasn't so easy to do because there is still some language barriers, especially in the KIS, but at the end of the day, it's quite an improvement. But this being said, the data shows that crowdfunding remains a predominantly domestic matter. So basically, typically one invests through a platform in its member state to invest in a project in the same member state. That's it's not let's say harmonious across the union, but that's it's still a very big trend. That was the way before the CSPR, and it has changed, but maybe not at the pace that was anticipated. And this is also an important element for us to consider when deciding the type of issues we want to prioritize. The regulation doesn't cover all aspects in relation to crowdfunding. There is certain limited, but there is certain aspects which relates to which are left with national law. And while we cannot really intervene to harmonize national law, very obviously, but we can try to see to monitor those practices to make sure that practices in a member state is not too divergent from what is happening in the rest of the union. So that was the 3 points I wanted to take a step on, or to take a look on. Looping back to the prioritization of the policy work of the ESMA crowdfunding task force, I would say that this report already allows us to prioritize more precisely the issues the crowdfunding task force will work on, offering us perspective on what matters most considering the economic and geographic data available. With time, as this report will get more granular or focus on specific aspect, it will help us even more potentially pointing out harmonization issues or inconsistency of the sort. At last, this report is also important for us as at ESMA in our mission to help the Commission to assess the impact of the legislation and whether a specific point needs to be reconsidered now or at a later time. Thank you very much. I will now hand over to Valentina and Alex for potential Q&As.
Thank you very much, Laurent. I was interested also to hear the relevance from a policy perspective. One figure, just to pick up on one point Laurent mentioned on the fact that some member states have very high participation rates. In Lithuania, I think we perhaps calculated in the previous report that over 20. The number of investors exceeds 20% of the adult population in the country. So it's really a kind of culture of participating in some member states. With that, I'll hand over to our colleague Spiros, who's monitoring the Q&A. So Spiros, are there questions we've received?
So thank you very much, everyone, for your presentation. And currently, I think we have around 3 or 4 questions in the Q&A. First one is, why do you separate debt and loan-based crowdfunding so strictly, since essentially both are debt and probably the choice of one or the other financial instrument depends mostly on local law and is not unified across the EU?
Thanks, Spiros. So I think one simple reason analytically is that we have the data available, so the breakdown is provided in the data set. And if we want to look at the two combined, which, as I think the questioner points out, they're economically, I think, largely equivalent. It's relatively simple just to sum those, consider that as a joint category, but breaking them down is something that's available to us. And also, as pointed out, because the choice of whether to use one or the other is likely to be a function of, say, local legal system and regulatory rules, it does potentially then link to kind of fragmentation in some sense. So I think Laurent also pointed out that the type of financial instrument more generally is of interest when thinking about the maybe the drivers of fragmentation or the potential, giving more insight into the role that local regulatory regimes may be playing. But economically, I fully agree that we have really equivalent in terms of the structure there.
Thanks, Alex. And the next question is about data. So if there's any data available on whether the funded projects are mainly within Europe or outside Europe?
So we don't have, unfortunately, a kind of way to summarize where economic activities funded are taking place. I think that's something, though, that would be very useful. Also thinking about how there's generally a kind of focus, as I understand it, on raising capital within the EU to support the European economy. So maybe that's something, even if we can't get insight directly from the data set, something that we can try to explore more and provide more context when, at least qualitatively, based in future discussions with market participants and external experts too.
Next question is about what does the crowdfunding industry can do in order to support ESMA in publishing the data for 2025 quicker, since they submit their data to the NCAs within 4 weeks?
Yes, thanks. So I think this is, I think, from Carsten. So thanks, Carsten, for the question. And we previously been in touch also on this, but we do recognise that the process is relatively lengthy given the initial stage. We actually also have colleagues from our data experts and colleagues here. Actually, a huge amount of work did go into data quality, and we had to have several rounds of kind of iteration, providing additional technical support in some cases, which is just a consequence of the kind of constraints we have in practically in the data reporting. However, yeah, we are going to try this coming year also to review the timetable and try to make it as quick as possible. And I'm sure we will be in touch, perhaps also bilaterally, to think if there are further ways that we can do that.
Another question is about if there's any planning to publish some data or study on crypto-based crowdfunding or sustainable crowdfunding.
So I don't think it's something that we've currently envisaged. So Valentina is the expert on innovation, but I don't know if there's anything we can really comment on at this point.
No, I'm not aware about crypto, but I see a question about report on AI used by crowdfunding service providers. As I mentioned already, there will be a report on the use of AI by firms operating in securities sector. In this report, we analyze aggregated data, sometimes highlighting trends for specific type of firms like asset managers, investment firms. But I think the data singled out for crowdfunding platform is probably the fullest in this report. And but for other trends which are very similar for crowdfunding as for the whole sector, again, I invite you to read the report, which will be published in the second half of February.
Thank you, Valentina. And another question is
maybe just to follow up on clarify that the cryptos which are not MiFID financial instruments are not in the scope of the crowdfunding regulation, so they cannot be offered by CSP at this stage, which in practice reduce the type of cryptos to be on which a potential reporting could be made. And that's one point. Another point is this report is based on a legal obligation ESMA had on the crowdfunding regulation, and we set up. We have a implementing regulation on the topic. The use of crypto in the field of crowdfunding, from what we understand, is still relatively limited because of the legal restriction I just mentioned. But it's certainly, as Alex mentioned, something that we will be keeping in mind for future iteration of this report or another report on top of the publication on artificial intelligence, which was just mentioned.
Thank you very much. There's another question about the reason that some countries have significantly more crowdfunding providers than others, and if this is related to the regulatory environment, and if there are any initiatives planned to specifically target those countries in which crowdfunding is not really established yet.
Yes, I can take it if you. So the structure of the market, it's first of all, it's certainly a continuation of the and I think this is in the report, the continuation of what we had before the implementation of the CSPR. So if we take the top 5, which we mentioned several times, I think all of them had a pre-existing national regime, which was really, let's say, promoting the development of the market. In some of those top 5 member states, crowdfunding is also a way to feed or to respond to a demand which is present locally, also because of other restrictions. Notably restriction on lendings, and so the structure of the markets in those pre-existing market grows thanks to thanks to the introduction of the regulation, but was starting from a very strong existing base. In some member states, the crowdfunding was inexistent before the regulation entered into application, and the development is taking off. Us, ESMA, we are acting as supervisors, and we coordinate the action of national competent authorities. Promoting crowdfunding is something which can be done at national level through trade association, which can also be done politically at national and European level. But it's not something we as supervisors are, let's say, in ideal position to do. This being said, there is a monitoring and there is an involvement even of the smallest market in the work we do, be it the data gathering or the policy work.
Thank you very much. And there's another question: if people can receive the data for a specific country in the data set.
Yes, so we do. I think in the interactive dashboard, we do have some country breakdowns. I think so. We receive anonymized data at EU level from NCAs, but we can provide certain country breakdowns too. So perhaps if there was a kind of specific variable, we could consider what's possible in that regard.
Thanks very much, Alex. With that, I think we have answers to the majority of the questions in the Q&A. And if there are no other questions from the attendees, I think we could wrap it up.
Yes, I see also perhaps there's maybe some more specific questions on the way it's possible to receive or download data, which is not necessarily something I'm able to comment on in detail. It's not my area of expertise, but I think we can also pass some of these more technical questions or comments on to the relevant colleagues. Additionally, I think there was also perhaps something about whether it's possible to infer that the country has issued a license, but the provider has not been active or kind of raised funding in a time period. So there, in fact, we can do some inference by comparing the reported data we have, for instance, of 2024 with the ESMA register I mentioned. I had just been trying to load it up on my screen, but unfortunately, I think I have a connection issue. But in any case, we could see how many licenses were issued for instance, in a calendar year from that table, and then compare it to the number of entities raising capital in our reporting data. Thanks. So with that, I think then we can. There's also something on tax and local restrictions. I think it's possibly difficult for us to comment on tax in detail. Again, tax is not an area of ESMA competence. So if tax is acting as a barrier, I think it's something that we are kind of interested in terms of how it affects the market, but it's not something where we would have kind of competence as an authority to be closely involved. But thanks. And with that, I think we can then conclude the session. So I was seeing there were quite a few questions, in fact, arriving. So it's good that there's been a very high level of interest from the attending, and thanks again for the participation. And as mentioned, there will also be a report next month that my colleague Valentina mentioned and kept focusing on AI. So then it sounds like that would also be of interest to many of you. So keep your eyes peeled. Thanks again for joining us this morning, and goodbye.
Thank you.